On Chaf Aleph, Amid Aleph Mishnah, Kol HaRoikin and Intzom B'Yushalayim Tohorin. Spit of a Zav or a Nida is also as Metame if you touch it. So, however, they made a takana that any spit found in Yerushalayim is Tohorin. Normally, there's a Gzeira anywhere else except Yerushalayim, because we don't know, it's a suffix whose spit this is. So in Yerushalayim, they didn't make the Gzeira. Chutz mishal shoika el yodiv Rab Meir. The upper market, Rab Meir held, either because there were goyim there who operated laundries, or the Jewish Zavim hung out up there, and therefore the majority of the people up there were Zavim. So there, you went after Rov, and therefore the spit would be Tomei. Now, during the rest of the year, in the roads or the streets where people walk, so Shebe'em Sa Tmei, people walked in the middle of the road, the majority of the people. So there, the spittle would be considered Tomei. We're talking about not Yerushalayim because we made a Gzeira. Shebitstadim Tohoiri. Since very few people walked on the sides. However, Vishas HaRegel, during Yontif, most people went to the mikveh during Yontif because they had to eat korbanos, and the majority of people walked in the middle of the street. So then, Shebe'emsa Tohorin, and the opposite, Shebitstadim Tmeim. Because it's always Shamuatim Mistakin Litztadim, the minority always goes off to the sides. Okay, Kol HaKelim. Now, what about utensils that are found? So those that are in Tzom Yerushalayim, Derech Yerida L'Beis HaTfilah Tmeim. So let's say there was a road going down to the mikveh, and you found discarded utensils there. So we assume that those utensils have not been to the mikveh yet, so they're tamei. Now the road leading away from the mikveh back up to the environs of Yerushalayim, tohorin. Shalok yiridasan aliyasan the Rab Meir. Rab Meir said you treat kalim differently based on where you find them. However, Rabbi Yossi Omer kulan tohorin. We don't make such a distinction. All vessels in Yerushalayim were considered tahor because the Chazal, when they made a takana that all vessels that are found, and you don't know what they are, their status is tamei everywhere else. But in Yerushalayim, they're tahor, just like we learn in the Seif of the Mishnah regarding spit. Now, there's exceptions. Chutz min asal v'magrefa v'maritza hamiyuchadim l'kvaros. These were like a pickaxe and a shovel, and this was the utensils that grave diggers would use. So those utensils come in contact with mesim, so therefore if you found them, they would be considered tamei. Okay. Now, among a utensil that has a different din is a sakin, a knife. Obviously, knives were used to shecht. So, and if how we treat the knife is going to make a difference in terms that we might treat it on a higher level of concern, because a sakin is going to shecht korbanos. So it depends. Sakin shenimsis biyudalid. So if you found a knife the morning of the 14th of Nisan, shoichet b'miyad, you could check with it right away, because the majority of knives, the owner had taken it to the mikveh. They would go to the mikveh, and then there would be hair. So they would take it the 13th, the night of the 13th, and then you need hair of shemesh. So they would put it in the mikveh sort of in the afternoon or towards the evening of the 13th. Then you have the sun goes down, that's hair of shemesh. Now the knife is pure. And you would have done that in order to have a pure knife that you could use the next morning to shech the Korban Pesach. So any knives that were found lying in the street. So the majority of the knives in Yerushalayim on that day would be Tor. So you could shecht with it right away. Now, Bishloisha Asar, if you found it on the 13th, so then you're not sure. So Shona Umar, you got to go to the mikveh, put it in the mikveh, and then at night, you'd have Erev Shemesh, be ready for the next day. That's a knife. Kupitz is like a meat cleaver. You didn't shecht with it, but you used it to chop up meat. So whether you found it on the 13th or the 14th, you got to be toivelit. See, even on the 14th, they wouldn't necessarily toivel the meat cleaver. You're not allowed to cut the bones of a korban pesach. So we assume that the meat cleaver would not have been gone to the mikveh. However, Chal Arbas Lios b'Shabbos, like this year, if Erev Pesach was Shabbos and you found it on Shabbos, so Shoichet B'miyad. So we assume that a knife or a cleaver would have been taken to the mikveh from Friday night, and also B'Tes Vav Shoichet B'miyad. If you found it on the 15th, you could shecht it because it was also you would also have been immersed in a mikveh from the night before. And another din. Nimtza kshura l'sakin, if the meat cleaver was found tied to the knife, arehi kasakin, then it follows how you would do with the knife. That means, remember we said, if you find the knife on the 14th, the knife is tor, so if a cleaver was tied to it, it would also be tor. If you find it on the 13th, and the cleaver is tied to the knife, they would both have to go to the mikveh. So, Rav Avin b'Shem Rav Shub ben Levi, katzran shel nochrim hayasha, that there was a laundry of goyim up in this upper shuk, and Chazal made a takana that the spit of all Gentiles were also tamei. So therefore, if you find spit up in that upper market, it would be tamei. Rav Chanina, aruda hayunoichrim b'Yushalayim. Arudas are mules, donkeys, and they would kill them, Yushalayim, in order, the Meforshim say, to provide meat for the gladiator. In Jerusalem, there was like a Colosseum. I don't think the ruins of that have been uncovered, but there were stadiums where gladiatorial games were fought. And part of that, they would have lions. They would they would fight the lions, and the donkey meat was used to feed the lions. So there was blood up there. The pilgrims who came up to be oile regel, they were dipping in their knees deep in blood, but it was blood of nevela, of a dead animal. The Chacham didn't say anything to them. Are they tar? Are they tamei? They didn't say anything. Rav Simon b'Shem Rav ben Levi, Ma'isa b'Freida Mishel Beis Rebbe, was also a mule in the house of Rebbe, Shemesa, that died. V'tiaro es tamei mishum nevela. Now, of course, the carcass, a kazayas of the flesh of such an animal would be tamei as nevela. But it was a question, what about the blood of such a carcass? So they said it's tohor. It makes no difference how much blood? V'lagive didn't answer. Shol Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Armalei ad revius tohor. Up until revius a log of the blood, it's tohor. Because once a revius a log, if it's dry, it turns into a kazayas. So yoiser mikan tomei. Uvash Rab Lezer lechazerle. Rav Shimon Shmuasa was like embarrassing to Rab Lezer that Rab Shimon hadn't answered him. Rav Bibi Avi Yosef was sitting masni hadin uvda, and a case like this came in front of him. Rav Yitzchak bar Bisna ad kama. How much is the blood of a nevela tor, Amar le'ad revi'is tor, Yos Mikan Tome, Ubot Bey. He also kicked him, or he didn't answer him right away. Amar le Razrika, begin to have a shorlecha ad boy. When he asked you a question, why did you kick him? Amar le, you know what? Begin to love a daitibi. My mind wasn't right. When the pasuk says your life will be in front of you, a person who buys wheat for a whole year, because even then he might run out. You'll be afraid night and day. Somebody who buys from like a middleman, and the lotamim b'chayach doesn't believe in his life at all. Somebody who buys bread every day from a baker, because next day he may not have any bread. And therefore his mind, was concerned. That's why he didn't answer. So Mike Don, how do we paskin? Hey, Rabbi Shua ben Psoira, Adam nevelos shehu tor. That dam of a nevela is tor, ma'u tor. It's tor, not that it doesn't metame things. It's tar milahachshir. It's a fluid that does not machshir other dry foods to become tummy. But halitam is metame, but it does have the capability to be metame. However, tamon taninon, we learn in another Mishnah, dam sheretz, the blood of a sheret. Remember, there's 8 shrotzim, that the carcass of the shrotzim of these rodents are metame. And it says the blood of a sheretz metame kibsaro. The blood is metame like the flesh, and very interesting. It has a property that metame veno machshir. It can be metame other things, but it's not machshir as a fluid, a dry seed to become tame. And there is no example like this. Ein lanu kayotzebo. And the Gemara wants to say then that implies that other dam of nevela, if it doesn't machshir, doesn't metame. So it must be that the dam of nevela, like we asked the question, also doesn't machshir. It doesn't metame. Gemara says, no. Don't say that the ein lanu kiyotzebo is only regarding this issue of the difference between the blood and the basar. Ein lanu kiyotzebo kashir tumaso. The shear of a sheretz is ka'adosh, like a lentil bean. There's no other tumah like that. Aval dam metame kibsaro. And therefore, there's no raya from there regarding our question. Rav Yossi pligi b'trein amayroin. It's machlekes amayroin. Chad amar tamei, blood of a nevela is tamei. Chad amar tamer, manda amar tamei. Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda, the Amoira holds. It's like. I'm sorry. Rav Yehuda the Tana holds that it's tamei, the blood of a nevela. Manda amar tamer. Rav Shua ben Psoira. Amalei Rav. Avduma the Menachusa v'Yoz. This is correct. Rabbi Yehuda, Marina the Ben Yisrael, he was the Moira da Asra for the house of Rebbe where this whole incident occurred. That's why he was metame. But that's up to a loig. I mean, up to a loig, it's tohor. Beyond a loig, it'll be tamei. So then we talked about the spittle. Didn't Rav Avo say the name Rav Chanina that lo gazra la roikin Yerushalayim, that when Chazal made a takana that spit should be tamei, all of Yerushalayim was tor. So why did Rav Meir say that the upper market was tamei? You know why? Because there was a laundry of goyim up there, and the goyim were a majority. So therefore, they have to paskin that the spit up there was not part of the takana. Then the Mishnah said, "B'shrei Mos Hashana Tmei Malchin Shiboiles," that during the rest of the year, people who walked in the middle were tamei. V'atohar Malchin ben Atzad. And the Tmeim would say, stay away, go to the side. So that's why the minority were on the side. However, the Toharim walked right in the middle. The The man would try to walk anywhere, but the Taharim would chase them off to the side. That's why they ended up in the minority on the side. Then we said all utensils are tar, except for the utensils that were used by the grave diggers. Didn't Rav Vo say in the name of Rav Yochanan that loy gazra ala kelim shebushalayim, that all kelim were declared tar? So why is this that you made a difference? You know why? Because there's evidence for that. If there's a mikveh on the bottom of the hill and people are walking down a road towards that mikveh and you find kelim there, we assume that those are going to be tameh because they were not taken to the mikveh yet. This pickaxe, he called it a tzipor. Tzipor is like a nail because it's like flat. In order to dig the rocks up, when you dig a grave, the pickaxe has to have a flat portion. Mandam tzipor and shayadoim tzipor is like a fingernail. Now, the one who called it maritza, shemaritza sa'evan lebeis hakvaros. Maritza is from like it rushes. It causes rushes the rock to the cemetery. Kopitz, we said, is a meat cleaver. Tani asaking shur la reza kamoisa. We said that if the meat cleaver is found tied to a knife, then you treat it with the halacha, like we said about a knife, that if you find it on the 14th, it's tor. If you find it on the 13th, it's tamei. Mishnah. Paroiches. There was a curtain. So there were two curtains that separate the Kodesh Kadoshim from the Kodesh. There was also a curtain that hung at the entrance of the Ulam, to the Heichal. Now, let's say the paroches was nitma, bivlad atuma. Let's say with not a avatuma, but with a rishon atuma. So matvilan also bifnim. They would put it in the mikveh inside the azara. Umachnis noso miyad. And it was brought into the base. It didn't have to be outside, because this is only midrabanon. Rabbanon say that normally a rishon, that is a rishon, cannot be metame a kli. It can only be metame food and drink. And here we're talking about when a beverage, when a fluid, no matter what it is, whether it's a rishon or a sheni, even it could be metame a kli, but it's only midrabanon. So since we're not talking about Isadiktuma, they didn't have to take it out of the Beis HaMikdash, and they could leave it in the Beis HaMikdash. However, shenit mispa avatuma, let's say a dead sheretz, which is an avatuma, fell on the curtain, then matfilin also bachutz. Then they had to put it into the mikvah outside of the Hazorah. The shoytchin also bechil. Bechil was like a double columned area around the Beis HaMikdash. They would hang it there. Why? They should eat of shemesh. Besides the mikvah, you need nightfall in order for it to be able to be brought in the Beis HaMikdash. If it was a new curtain that had not been seen, they hung it also on the big columns or benches that were outside the Beis HaMikdash. Why? It was such a beautiful, the artwork was so beautiful that they wanted the public to see it. Rav Shimon ben Asgan, the paroiches oivea tefach, it was a tefach thick, al shivim u'shtayim nimim ne'reges, was woven on 72 like looms. Ne'reges are called nima v'nima. On each thread, Chavdal Chutin was 24. So instead of 2-ply or 4-ply, it was 24-ply. Right? Each strand was made out of 24 threads. Orka, the length of it was mem amma, 40 ammas long, v'roch v'chaf, and 20 ammas wide. Umishmonim u'shtayim rivo ha'isa nasis. Here's machloikas what this means. Some say it cost 820,000 dinar, which is very massive amount. Other people say that it was made by 82 girls. Oisim b'chol shana, shtayim oisim b'chol, they made 2 every year. V'shalosh me'as kohanim adbila, they would need 300 kohanim to be toivelit. Most of the Rishonim say that that's a guzma, that it's an exaggeration. But maybe not. Maybe it was so heavy that they needed 300 kohanim to put it in the mikveh. Now, ilu amarhu echad kaful lishnayim. If it would have said double, right, each thread is double. And shazur means twisted by 3, l'shlosha. And mashzar, which is a term used in the Torah to describe curtains, is l'shisha. That would be a 6-ply. So arba mikan. So therefore, there are 4 different types, which leads to esrim va'arba. So there were 24 threads and all. That's why the Mishnah said 24. And some people tani shloshim ushtayim. Some people say that it adds up to 32. Why? Because ilo amar chut echad kaful, echad goes double. Lishnayim shazur goes to 3. And then la'arba mashzar, and mashzar is lishmona. So then you have 8 times arba mikan plus. That's why you have 32. Then there's a Mishnah ton arba mushmona. It was 48-ply. Ilo amar chut echad, kaful means lishnayim. Kliya is a term that means lishlosha. Shazur lishisha. Mashzar is 12. And since you had arba on each side, mikan arboim b'tam you have 48. Kosav echad oimer maseh rokem. Rokem means someone who embroiders. Uksiv echad oimer maseh choyshev. Choyshev is like a craftsman. What's the difference? Meiser rokem, which is an embroiderer, is parts of echad is one face. Meiser choyshev shnei partzufos means 2 faces. We're going to see what that means is, on one side, it looked like a lion, and on the other side, it looked like an eagle. That means the one who says one face, it's a lion on one side and it's blank on the other, like we would embroider. But can you imagine embroidering something where, remember, the thread goes through. So how can you have lion on one side and eagle on the other side? That's mamish a ma'aser choyshev. Rav Rav Lechem Yechad Ma'aser rokem, which was the simple embroidery, is arimi kan v'arimi kan. It was a line on both sides. Ma'aser choyshev is arimi kan v'cholek mikan. That the more complicated was, it's easy to make a line on one side, a line on the other side, because it's the same thing. But if you use this thread, it goes through and through, it'll look the same on both. It's more complicated to make a line on one side and have it blank, white wool on the other. And the Charona Amar, but the other Manda Amar says, Ma'aser roike means Ari Mikan v'cholek Mikan. Embroidery was a line on one side and blank on the other. Ma'aser choyshev Ari Mikan v'nesher Mikan. Like we said, a line on one side, eagle on the other side. Then the Mishnah said, B'shmonim u'shtayim ribo, 82 times 10,000, which is 820,000. Either that's how much the money it was. So Shmuel Guzma. He says it's an exaggeration, can't be so much. it cannot be so much money. And also, some say this, when it says guzma, it refers to the statement that there were 300 kahanim who were needed to dip it. It's machlokas. Kamon taninon, in another place we learned, pamim hayaleh keshlosh me'os kur, that it weighed 300 kur. Oh, I'm sorry, this refers to the ashes that were on top of the mizbeach. Well, again, that's a huge amount. And again, over here, based on that statement, Rabbi Yosef, Rabban Buin B'Shem Shmuel, Guzma, that no, that it cannot be so much. Mishnah. Besar Koche Kochim. So you have an Ola or a Chatas or an Osham. Those are the classic examples of a Koche Kochim. So you have a piece of meat that's in the Azara. Shenitma, and a dead rodent fell on it. Bein ba'avatuma, bein bevladatuma. Now, even if it's rabbinic, even if a Rishon touched it, because it's on a higher level, because it's hegdish, bein bifnim, bein b'chutz, whether it was touched on the inside, on the outside. So Beis Shammai oimim hakol yisaref bifnim. It has to be burnt in the Azara. Chutz mishenitma ba'avatuma, except if it was nitma by an avatuma, it has to be burnt b'chutz. Then you have to take it outside the Azor to burn it. Beis Hillel oimrim hakol yisaref b'chutz. Everything had to be burnt outside. Chutz mishenitma b'vladatuma bifnim. Something that is with a vladatuma, you burn it there. First of all, it's already there, and the tumah is less. Better to burn it where it's preferred, which is on the inside. Rabbi Eliezer Oimer, another shita. That which was nitma ba'avatuma, bein bifnim, bein b'chutz, yisref b'chutz. If it's mitame through an av, like the sheretz itself, then whether the kochim is inside or outside, you burn it outside. Shenitma b'vladatuma, if it was nitma with a rishon, so whether the kochim is bachutz, bein bifnim, yisref bifnim, you got to bring it back inside bifnim. Rabbi Kiva gives a general principle. Wherever it was nitma, that's where you burn it. So it became nitma inside, it's burnt inside. Nitma outside, it's burnt outside. Bar kapara omar, avatuma is dvar Torah. The avatuma refers to a tum of midaraisa. Vlada tuma is midivreya. And if minat Torah, it was not midaraisa, and the tum was on midrabanan, that's what it means, vlada tum in our Mishnah. For example, when a kli is touched by fluid that is tamei, minat Torah, there's no tumah there. Chazal made gzeira. So that type of, according to Bar Kapara, that kind of tumah is what the Mishnah is referring to as vlada tum. However, Rav Yochanan Amar, bein zeh, dvar Torah. We're talking both. We're not talking about rabbinic tumah. We're talking about a rishon, which is a tumah midaraisa. That's what's referred to as vlada tumah. The kasha Rav Yochanan, the Beis Shammai, and therefore, according to Rabbi Yochanan's pshat, it's a problem the way what Beis Shammai learned. The Beis Shammai call you start bifnim, because everything is burnt on the inside. Chutz mishnit b'avat tumah b'chutz, except if a piece of egdish was nitma outside by an avat tumah, then you don't bring it inside. Now, ma bein avat tumah b'chutz, ma bein vlada tumah b'chutz. If zev zeh lo dvar Torah, like if the vlada tumah is talking about not a dvar Torah, why would he bring it inside? And what? And he has a kash on the Beis Hillel as well. The Beis Hillel Amar hakoy sarf b'chutz. You burn everything outside. Chutz mashanin ma b'vlad atuma, except if it's a vlad, where then you burn it bifnim. Well, I understand. If we're learning now that there's no difference, they're both midrash vlad atuma bifnim. If zev is a lo dvar Torah. Lavu Rabbanon, Chacham didn't know El al Dvar Kapara. They had Bar Kapara's statement that Vlada Tuma means rabbinic Tuma, not Doraisa Dikab. But still, Kasha Bar Kapara, the Beis Shammai. But even the way Bar Kapara learning would be problematic for Beis Shammai. The Beis Shammai, remember, I'll call you Saref, Bifnim. No matter what the type of Tumah it is, it's all burnt inside, Chutz, except in a case where Hegdish was Nitma Ba'avatuma, if a sheretz fell on it, Bachutz. But Ma Bein Avatuma, Bein Bachutz, Bein Bifnim. What would be the difference if an Avatuma, Bachutz, Bifnim, Zevzeh, Lodvar Turahu? If according to the way Bar Kapar is learning, we're not always talking in both cases of a Tumah Deraisa. One of them might be Tumah Drabanan. So we'll begin to Rekiva Amar Makam to Masu Sham Teis Rafaso. So that's why Rabbi Kiva said, you burn it where you find it. But feel the Beis Hillel lo makshe. But that would be difficult even for Beis Hillel. The Beis Hillel Amar Kol Yisarf B'chutz. Everything is burnt on the outside. Chutz b'shnim v'vladatuma b'fnim. So ma be vladatuma bein b'fnim bein b'chutz. According to Rabbi Kiva, you got to burn it where you find it. And zev zeh lo medivrayim. And according to the way Rabbi Kiva is learning, we're not talking about both tumas being midrabbana, but begin to Rabbi Shimon Amar machalo umash umashkushal mitzora mishtalchem chutz l'shalosh machnos. The food and drink of a mitzora has to be sent beyond all the machnos. So that's a special gzeira that the Chachamim did to prohibit meat that was nitma even bivlada tuma. Same type of chumrah like they did by Mitzrayim. Mishnah. When you shechted the daily tamid in the morning, you chopped up the pieces into evorim, into limbs. The front leg, the front one on the right, the one on the left. There's only like, if you remember, we're going to learn in Zvachim, we're going to learn, there are 13 pieces. So evari atamid, they were lined up on the ramp. There was a ramp leading up to the top of the mizbeach, and these limbs were laid out, ready to be thrown on the mizbeach, halfway up the ramp to the bottom. B'mayriv, on the west, right? The ramp, right? The mizbeach is here. The ramp goes up. There's the west side of the ramp and the east side of the ramp. So they would line it up on the west side of the ramp. Now, shel musafin nitonin bechatzi keves lomata b'mizrach. The musaf limbs were lined up, again, on the ramp, halfway down to the bottom, but on the east side. Then shel rosh chadashim, tonight, right? Tomorrow there's going to be a musaf shel rosh chodesh. Nitonim al karku v'mizbeach milmalam. There was a circular, sort of an indent around the mizbeach, and that's where those limbs were placed. It was an ornamental border that went around the mizbeach. Hashkolim v'abikurim eina noagim el b'fnei habayis. The din of giving machzis a shekel and the din of bringing the bikurim up is only a mitzvah that is knowing when the bias stands. Av a meiser dogon, but giving meiser be'ema u'b'choyros, that 1 out of 10 animals has to be given as a meiser be'ema, or your firstborn animal noyagin baby b'fnei habayis ben shaloi b'fnei habayis. Those dinim apply even when the Beis HaMikdash is not around. What if today somebody says on a coin, I want to be magdish as a machzis a shekel or bikurim? The item becomes hegdish. Rabbi Shimon Omer bikurim kodesh, and if somebody says Bisman has said that this Bikurim should be Hegdish, Einan Kadosh. Doesn't work for Bikurim. says Reb Shimon. Now, Ezer Karkov Amizbeh, there were two Karkovim. There was a Karkov on the top. There was a pathway on the top of the Mizbech. There was a pathway halfway up the Mizbech. So which one? Amma ben Karen lekaren mokum hilach raglei kohanim. Up on the top of the Mizbech by the corners, so there was a pathway between each corner. That's the Karkov where the limbs of the korban of the Rosh Chodesh had to be placed. Now, Musvei Shabbos, Musvei Rosh Chodesh mi kodim. So if Rosh Chodesh falls on a Shabbos, and a Shabbos, you bring a korban musaf, shnei chvasim uviyom ma Shabbos, shnei chvasim b'nei shana tamim. That's the musaf. That's why that parsha is read when we daven musaf. So two chvasim is the musaf. Musaf means additional. So besides the regular korban tamid that you brought in the morning, the musaf is an additional offering of shnei chvasim. But then you also had to bring a sa'ir chatas as the musaf for Rosh Chodesh. So which one do you offer first? Rav Yirmiyah Sover, Meimer Musfei Shabbos, Umusfei Rosh Chodesh, Musfei Rosh Chodesh Kodmi. He wants to say that you offer the musaf of Rosh Chodesh first. And Chayled Rav Yirmiyah min Adah. The proof for Rav Yirmiyah is from the following: Shiru shel Shabbos v'shiru shel Rosh Chodesh. The Leviim, of course, when the korbanos were offered, would sing the song of the day. Mizmor Shir Yom HaShabbos, Hayom Yom Rishon l'Shabbos, Hayom Yom Sheni l'Shabbos, and they would bring each day as a different shir. So the shir of Rosh Chodesh is Barchi Nafshi. The shir of Shabbos is Mizmor Shir Yom HaShabbos. So when Musaf and Rosh Chodesh, Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh came together, which song did they sing first? So Rabbi Yirmiyah brought up a risa that says Shir Shel Rosh Chodesh Kodem, that they sang the Shir of Rosh Chodesh. So must be that when we have a debate which korban to bring, they bring the Musaf Rosh Chodesh. Rav Yusuf, no, Shniyahi. There's a nafkamina, because Tamon Amar Rav Chia b'Shem Rav Yechnon, K'dei lefarsamo ulahodiyah Shir Rosh Chodesh. Over there, they wanted to people. How did people know that it was Rosh Chodesh? The Levim on Shabbos sang the Mizmor Shel Yom HaShabbos in Shachris, and they sang the same song in Musaf. Now, if on Shabbos Rosh Chodesh they would have sung the Shabbos shir first, nobody would have known it was Rosh Chodesh. So they sang Dafka, the shir shel Rosh Chodesh first, by Musaf to remind people that today is Rosh Chodesh. Now the Baraisa says that in actuality, in performing the korbanos itself, he would first shech the musaf of Shabbos. But they would first sing the song of Rosh Chodesh. The Bramhacha Musaf Shabbos Musaf Rosh Chodesh. When you have the musaf of Shabbos Musaf Rosh Chodesh, Musaf Shabbos Koidmin, Hashem Kol Atarim Echaver Kodim Es Chaver. From the basic rule that we know of something that happens on a more frequent basis. So you have a Shabbos every week. You have a Rosh Chodesh only once a month. So which is more tadir? Shabbos is more tadir. So we have a rule. Tadir v'shena tadir, tadir koidim. So it does fit the rule. So then the Mishnah says Shekalim would be Kurim. Hashkalim Kidshu. If somebody's Magdish Shekalim, does it become Hegdish Bizman Hazeh? Rav Shimon ben Yehuda Mishum Rav Shimon ben Bein Elu Lo Kidshu. So he says no, not Bikurim and not Shekalim. If you try to be Magdish them today, they won't become Hegdish. Tani Ger Bizman Hazeh, Srach Lavi, Kino, Revias Kesev. A ger had to bring a pair of birds. He has to bring an olah. Same way when Klal Yisrael were at Har Sinai, they all brought oilos. So when you become a Jew, you have to bring an olah. Now the minimum olah is 2 birds. Olos, you could bring olah sa'ov, 2 birds, a nest, a king. Now a ger bizman hazeh doesn't have a base of mikdash to bring it. So you know what? He has to set aside money so that when Mashiach comes, he will have money set aside to bring his korbanos. On Rav Shimon, Bitl Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai, B'nei Takala. You know what? Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai, when the temple was destroyed, he made a takana abolishing that law because of takala. Takala means it's going to come to a danger. Well, what's the danger? If a person set aside money and he's sanctified, he's going to come to use sanctified money. It's going to be over me'ilah. And the Gemara says, "Ma'av takala." What's the danger here? Like we learned, kadot, the tani. Bizman hazeh ein magdishin. You don't magdish anything. The lo marichin, you make no erech vows. An erech vow is when you point to a person and say, I want to give the value of such and such person to the Beis HaMikdash. The lo machrimim. Machrimim is when I give over my whole assets to the Beis HaMikdash. The lo magbiin trumas u'maisros, and I don't separate trumas u'maisros by lifting it. Bizman hazeh. Because of this takala business. However, im higdish, if he did, or herich, or echrim, or bia, if aksus tisoref, if it was clothing, you should burn it. If it's a behema tiaker, you shall destroy it. You put it in an igloo, you close the door, you don't give it food and drink, it dies from itself. And if it's money, Yelchuli Amamelch, you got to throw it into the Dead Sea. Because if you end up using it, you're going to be over me'ilah. Over v'higdish man ma. If a person was over the law, was over this takana, and he went ahead and he consecrated something. Let's say the ger went ahead and he separated some money for his cane. Does it have kedusha? So, from the fact that we said the Amr of Shimon Bitl Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai B'nei Takala, that Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai had abolished this whole thing, means that in Amra Ovar V'Higdish Kidsha. Obviously, why did Rabbi Yochanan be mevatel? Because he was concerned that if people went ahead and did it, would take hold. So the answer to your question, if someone went ahead and did it, it is magdish. Now, Rav Yura and Tudira, boy, coming Rav Yosef. He asked the following question in front of Rav Yosef. Hacha at Amr Kitshu, Hacha at Amr like Kitshu. Understand, here you say it does have the power to become Hegdish, and there you said it doesn't. Amr lay, come on. Lekach en magdishin lechatchila. En echanami. Lechatchila you should not be magdish. Lefi shemitzvah lahakriv mitruma chadasha. This is talking about the Truma Salishka, and they wanted that the first money that comes out of Truma Salishka to buy the Korbanei Tzibur. It should be from the new and not from the old. And that's why they did not be magdish initially, all that money that was in there. Okay, so Mitzvah Lakrid Mitruma Chadasha. Because that way you have new ones and old ones, and you only want to buy the animals for korbanos with the new funds drawn from the 1st of Nisan on. Those are called the new shekalim. So over there, it's not the fact that someone's going to come use it and you're going to be chayiv me'ilah. It's rather because of this financing mechanism that they wanted it from the new shekalim and not the old ones. But hachamai is in our case, where we're talking about the ger being magdish. What? It's not that the kedusha is going to be an old kedusha, because this kind of hekdesh isn't coming from new funds or old funds. It's coming from funds that he designates. These birds of the ger doesn't require a new shekalim versus old shekalim. So therefore, if hekdesh kadosh, therefore, if it's magdish, it becomes sacred. And therefore, Yarichan Shayivna Beis Hamikdash and Yabona Abayis Kivrishoina, Mirz Hashem, the Beis Hamikdash will be built, and the Titrum Trumas Alishka Min HaChadasha, and then they will buy the korbanos from the new shkalim that were given. Bismana Becha B'Nisim. Okay, we'll stop here. We'll leave the last pasuk for a siyum that we'll make. Let's just remind ourselves, we have to make a siyum for brachis, for Shabbos, for Erevin, for Psachim.